Voices in the Wind, a report on the creative experience in a contemporary world. I'm Oscar Brand, another voice in the wind. The next voice you'll hear is that of one of the leading scientists and philosophers of the 21st century.
I don't think the word artist can be professed by anybody. I think artist is a term that must be given by the society to an individual as a consequence of the behavior of that individual. I don't think you can profess to be a poet or an artist.
You just are one.
Yeah.
Our program today is concerned with the genius of one man, Buckminster Fuller, a man of such consequence that in many foreign countries he's acknowledged as the greatest living American. In America, he has, by a few cynics, been labeled a consummate nut. But before we hear again from Buckminster Fuller, we feel the need for knowledgeable guidance, and that's supplied in this case by his friend Norman Cousins, who is also publisher of the Saturday Review.
The question has often been asked whether people understand precisely what Bucky is talking about. And I submit that this may, in fact, be the least important part of that experience. What happens is that they feel better about the world. They feel better about themselves. They've had a demonstration of someone who comprehends the lines of connection between our world and other worlds, between the past and present, the present and future. They feel that they've somehow been hooked up to eternity. They have a sense of being in the presence of an intuitive genius as well as a systematic thinker and scientist. What they are left with is a resolve, I think, that life is worth living, and that they're not going to become hopeless or despairing.
Norman Cousins believes in print. Now, while Marshall McLuhan and Roone Arledge announced the death of the printed word, Cousins points out that the announcement was printed, courtesy of the same newspapers and magazines, whose death has been promised daily. Norman Cousins publishes the Saturday Review, the first magazine of ideas to reach more than 30,000 subscribers. Cousins is also one of the world's leading experts on the subject of Buckminster Fuller, having met him in the late 30s and lost him for 15 years. Now he's a willing shield-bearer to the quixotic philosopher-scientist. Norman Cousins assured us that it wasn't necessary to understand the lectures of Buckminster Fuller to profit thereby and to enjoy them as well.
Now, when you consider the fact that there are other speakers who talk in a way that is completely understood, and people can take away exactly what is said, they absorb all that information, but they don't. It doesn't particularly change them. It doesn't enable them to go on with life. It doesn't spare them the principal disease of the 20th century, which is helplessness or despair. Therefore, you can understand that his lectures have to be appraised, not just according to scientific content, but according to the way people's lives are affected by what he says. And as I said a moment ago, people do have the sense of being on a larger stage than they've ever known before, and knowing that somehow it all makes sense, that it has the sanction of good scholarship behind it. Although, if pressed, they couldn't document the reason for it, but they do have that sense that they have been privileged to witness a combination of human reason, human intuition, and the scientific method and poetic expression in a way that somehow all comes together in a seamless garment, even though it's not completely comprehensible. People sometimes ask why it is that Bucky is so popular with young people, and sometimes with children, or I should say especially with children. And the answer is not elusive. The fact of the matter is that for all of Bucky's advanced knowledge and for all of the intricate nature of his speculations, the fact of the matter is that he still has this childlike curiosity about life, the childlike curiosity about the universe, he has this marvelous sense of wonder about everything concerned with life, and young people have this sense of delight because they do manage to grasp the notion, and also to share with Bucky this magnificent sense of wonder that in children is waiting to be satisfied.
You had said that 30 years before this you met him, and then you met him again 15 years now. Both of you really are in a similar circle in relation to world affairs and philosophies, among other things. It seems surprising that for 15 years your paths didn't cross in such a way that you became closer again.
Yes, I guess so. I'd always respected Bucky and been interested in him as a human phenomenon. There's no one quite like him. And the older he gets, the better he gets. It's hard for me to give myself a satisfactory answer about your question, but our coming together was the result of interesting circumstances. I had been the chairman of an American delegation to the Soviet Union, and I invited Bucky to be one of the members of that delegation. Bucky accepted, and it was as though we'd known each other all our lives, and I guess it gives other people this feeling too. When we were over there, one of the Russians had the idea that we might set aside an evening for creative recreation in which each side would put its champion into the arena in a sort of forensic contest on the future of humanity. The ground rules were that they would put up their gladiator and we would put up ours. Each person would speak for 15 minutes, and then there'd be some cross comment. But the 15-minute limitation was stressed as an important part of the ground rules. The head of the Soviet Academy spoke first. He described the world as he thought it would be in the year 2000. He had available to him a sheaf of statistics in which he talked about population, food supply, environment, resources. It all was very statistical and very plausible, and I'm afraid somewhat sterile. But he sat down at the end of 15 minutes, and I could tell from the way the Russians smiled at one another that they felt that their gladiator had given them an edge. Bucky entered the arena, smiled that winning smile of his, almost childlike in its innocence, folded his hands in front of him, Hindu style, looked skywards, and then took off. About 50 minutes or an hour later, I looked around. The Russians were entranced, indeed transported. And after he finished, the head of the Soviet Academy, who had preceded him, whispered in my ear. He said, "It is no contest. Mr. Fuller wins hands down." It was magnificent, he said. Never have I heard anyone speak with such eloquence and such brilliance. Tell me, he said, what did he say? Now, he was not being facetious. He was being serious. And this bears on my point that Bucky communicates beyond language. He gave the Russians the kind of experience they rarely get in a society that tends to stress cold facts and numbers at the expense of the poetry of life. Bucky has plenty of poetry and has plenty of soul. And now they were getting a chance to respond in the way human beings naturally respond to genuine poetry. It was not the kind of poetry that makes its claim on the creative imagination in terms of its combination of words or the way the words turn to one another. Rather, it was the kind of poetry that's connected both to heart and mind, that as I said a moment ago, gives an individual that sense of connection to all other human beings and to the universe so that he feels part of something larger than anything he ever experienced before. The Russians, who listened to Bucky through an interpreter, may not have gotten all the words, but they certainly got the music.
The poetry of heart and mind. That's Norman Cousins' appraisal of the speeches, lectures, articles, and the inventions of one of the greatest of 20th century scientist philosophers, R. Buckminster Fuller. Fortunately, we also have Mr. Fuller's appraisal of science and art.
I say, to me, every great scientist is an artist, and every great artist is a great scientist. I think they're really all one and the same. I think they're not only artists, scientists, but they're poets. And we'd like to make things in categories, but it doesn't make a difference whether they happen to be doing a very delicate task, dealing with what nature's saying there, using their intuition to look in the right direction as a scientist and discovering one of those beautiful generalized principles. I think every one of those men who've done that are really great artists, scientists. Because great deal here is the intuition, you see. It isn't just a technique at all, but sensitivity and a sense of significance.
Richard Buckminster Fuller has been called this planet's friendly genius. He's probably one of the best-known Americans in the world, ranking with Jimmy Carter and Muhammad Ali. He has said of his grand perceptions and inventions, "The mind makes contact with the eternal in these moments of discovery." His moments of discovery include his Dymaxion car, which could transport 9 people at 130 miles per hour, his Dymaxion house, the residence on a stick, they call it, the Dymaxion world map, synergetic geometry, an entire new approach to mathematics, and his famed geodesic dome, which encloses more space with far less material and expense than any other known structure. Now, how did he begin his creative career? Well, he says he simply decided one day to stay 50 years ahead of his time, observing, "I'll be so far ahead that I'll pose no threat at all to the people who have a vested interest in opposing progress. They'll just call me a nut." Well, on that one point, Buckminster Fuller was wrong. He is not called a nut. He is one of history's most reasonable individuals. And as Bob Molesky assures us, he's a pleasure to interview. Now, for instance, Bob asked Bucky, "Why do you object to using the word creativity when you're speaking of human beings?"
Because human beings did not create the universe. In fact, I don't like the word creation itself. The brain, in contradistinction to the mind, our brains are always and only correlating the information coming from our senses, our hearing, our seeing, touching, smelling, or it might be the touching, there's a sense of pain internally. But brains then are always correlating these special case informations. Special case, that's this one smells this way in contradistinction to that way. Our minds, however, have the capability from time to time to discover relationships existing between special cases that are not manifest or predicted by any of the special cases considered only by themselves. These great extraordinary things such as humans discovering the mass attraction law of gravity out of the millions of years of stimulation by lights, which we call the planets. Not until man had mathematical calculating capability. In 1500 we have Copernicus with calculating capability discovering that we were not having the sun going around us, but we were one of those planets going around the sun. Succession of events by Tycho Brahe and Kepler, Galileo, Isaac Newton have discovery of the interpulling between these celestial bodies covering great millions of miles distances, where if you have the distance between the celestial bodies, you increase their interattractiveness fourfold and vice versa. That is, for an arithmetical change of distance, there is a geometrical rate of change, algebraic rate of change for the interattractiveness. So this is something, a relationship existing between them. There's nothing in one of those bodies by itself that says it's going to pull the other. It's only because there have been those millions of years realizing they are acting some kind of a team different from the fixed stars, that you realize something is going on between, how they're correlating, and suddenly discover where this attraction is, but I say it's not in by itself. In That's a generalized principle expressed only mathematically. Can only be found by the human mind. And in order to qualify as a generalized principle, there must never be any exceptions, which means generalized principles are inherently eternal. I find the human brain then dealing always in special cases, all of them terminal. So the human brain has asked man for a beginning of universe and an end of universe. Mind finds only the eternal, so there's no beginning or ending. So I don't like the word creation at all. There's as an a priori complex of generalized principles which all interact interaccommodatively one with the other, whether it's principle of leverage or the principle of optical refraction of light or the mass attractions, whatever it may be. So that I find all that human beings ever do is to discover these principles, and they've then found they can employ them. And man discovers it with the principle of the lever. He does not invent it, simply discovers the principle, and it has mathematical relationships. If you distance from the fulcrum to the load being a basic distance, and then if you go out equal distance on the lever arm, it's 1-to-1, it's balance. But if you go out 2, you have 2-to-1 advantage. So those human beings whose muscles are very limited are able to move and negotiate items weighing 30 and 40 times what their muscle could lift. So that all we do is use the principles which we discover, which are eternal and a priori. That's why I don't like the word creative about a man. He can invent novel uses for the lever, but he doesn't invent the principal lever.
That's easier to see in the case of the sciences. For instance, Einstein getting in touch with a generalized principle and beginning to understand relativity. I think it's more difficult to see in the case of artists when they're considered creative. Is that too getting in touch with a generalized principle?
No, they are. Sometimes, long ago, they made their own paints, they made their own brushes, but they are using a language which appeals to them as the best way to say something. And you happen to use the oral, and that is, I'll call that an art, all right, the proper use of those communication tools. I simply say the artist is using communication tools to communicate what he's concerned with. And he may be concerned with many different kind of stimuli, but I don't like don't like the word creative, but the word art I like because you articulate, you speak. You might do it sculpturally, you might speak it with paint, you might do it with oral ways, you may do it by body dance, communication.
Is that your definition of art? Communication?
Yes. I don't think the word artist can be professed by anybody. I think artist is a term that must be given by the society to an individual as a consequence of the behavior of that individual. I don't think you can profess to be a poet or an artist.
You just are one.
Yeah.
You have said often that our role should be to change the environment and not to change man. Can art be a way of changing the environment?
Well, I'd say all artifacts have their effects. A word is an artifact; it's a tool, and a painting or sculpture is a communication, and you can call it a tool if you want, and it is a tool of communication with that artist is feeling very strongly, possibly negatively, maybe celebratingly, we don't know what. But the point is that this is his art, and I would think, yes, very inspiring. Certainly I recall when I was committing myself in 1927 to doing everything trying to solve all problems with artifacts, which would take advantage of the fact that the environment is intertransformable and everywhere transforming, to develop the right environment, because artifacts make the environment. A telephone is suddenly environment. This medium you and I are talking to people we don't know where is part of the environment now. There's something in front of you, it's a microphone, you and I don't, that's part of the environment, it's there and it communicates. Okay. Just as the air was there before we had the radio to carry our voice. It was a carrier. Now, I say then, when I was starting to commit myself to artifacts, to solve problems, always artifacts, back in Chicago in 1927, I used to go down to the Chicago Art Museum, which is a very fine one, and I'd walk through there, and the artists of of yesterday, artists, great artists, I found talking to me. They really do talk to you, and they couldn't be a more inspiring environment to realize somehow through the ages this man is in there where this particular potentate and king said, paint a picture of my wife, and he better do it, you're not going to survive. But he, in the painting of the wife, he inwardly tells what he really feels with his colors. He talks to you absolutely independent of the picture of his wife. So here is then the artist, his art is becoming very much an artifact, a part of the environment.
Well, in comprehensive design, which is a major part of your philosophy, you are speaking in terms of a generalized man, not a specialist, someone who has the ability to comprehend the total picture. Where does art fit into that, into a comprehensive designer?
I think all human beings are born comprehensivists. They're born like a candlelight. Shines in all directions, is interested in all directions. And yet with candlelight you can put a reflector behind it, or you can even put a lens in front of that and make that candle beam go really great distances, so that a candle which unreflected and unlensed might be seen only 400 or 500 yards or something like that, might be seen as a lighthouse out at sea 5 miles. So that this is like our specialists. So we take the children who are interested in the whole universe. They're extraordinary in the questions they ask about both macrocosm and microcosm of their parents. And the parents, having come into a world where it's been assumed that specialization is desirable and possibly inevitable, have also been processed by the education system to make them very much more specialized, so they can't answer the child adequately, as it happens to be in their particular specialized direction. So I personally feel that the artists, the ones who usually turn out to do things that make us call them an artist, have been children who realized when they came to school that they were being focused in directions that did not feel comfortable to them. Their intuitions want to maintain their comprehensive interests and maintain their sensitivity, not being told to get over sensitivity. This is the way the game goes. And I find they then they themselves are doing this only intuitively, so it's not an intellectual decision on their part to say, the school, I'm not going to cooperate at all, but they just spontaneously don't cooperate for fear something's happening to the wonderful gifts they've been given. So they often are called dropouts, and they then, because they didn't stay in school to learn the particular languages and the ways of communication in the school, they often turn out to be painter, sculptor, and we find that, fascinatingly enough, the Scientific American largest number, single category of subscribers are the artists. Others, they're tremendously interested in all the scientists are finding. They're also interested in the way of everyday living, and they're expressing themselves in their own way, their own language, which may not be familiar to most people, but you can really tell whether this person had an integrity in his expression. You can feel that. If he's just copying somebody else's specialization, where he sees each human being different, each one is absolutely different, and though several might say, I would like to paint the same picture, we both would paint the same picture. We both look at the same scene, and let's think of two very famous great artists and of history, and we will paint the same picture, but they will come out quite different due to the fact that the individuals are different. And so the difference in painters and great artists is not purposeful but inadvertent. It's in the emphasis of their genes, the emphasis of their experiences, make them see this that the other person is not seeing. And to me, then, the real artist is never trying to be an artist. He's moved, deeply moved by his experience of life. He's deeply moved by events around him, his environment. Maybe moved by compassion, love, anger, but he's moved, and he says something in his own language. Because he's a different human being, it looks differently. So I find art schools, people begin to pick out the style of this man, the style of a Picasso, and so forth. And often at the art schools, the kids outperform Picasso as far as just dexterity of his style without having anything they're doing there for the moment as an artist at all. So that I hope I'm making some of the points clear. Art is then, I think, the poetry, all of it is not, neither can you profess it, nor does the real artist even realize he's being an artist. It's this way he talks.
You've known a good many artists over the period of your life. I'm thinking in particularly of Isamu Noguchi, who you lived with practically for a while. You've met John Cage and quite a few others. Have they had an effect on your life and your thinking?
Oh, very much. They are very much part of my life. They are my environment. Extraordinary, warm, human understanding, inspiring. I've really been very fortunate in the number of artists I know. Back in 1939, the Modern Museum was very young, but Congo Goodyear had been his first director, and he was retiring, and he'd done so much for artists that they were very grateful to him. And the artists in New York decided they'd like to have a dinner and let him know how much they thought of him. And they came to me and they said, Bucky, you know more artists than anybody else here in New York. Will you get up the list of the artists who were invited? And I did. I still have that list, and I'm really surprised how very fortunate I have been. And I didn't seek these artists. It's an amazing thing that my commitment to technology, but trying to solve problems with artifacts, somehow or other, while I felt I was dealing in the prosaic equipment, I was designing a musical instrument, not the music to be played on it, which was the way I actually talked about it. I was amazed at how many of the artists were sympathetic with that and realized that I was focusing on the instrument rather than but to them that they began to really take that as art too, and they befriended me in a very great way, and I found myself just being taken on by one after the other.
Well, as your friends can communicate with their art, you communicate with a language that is all your own. Can you tell us how you learned to express yourself the way you do?
This place, I enjoy language per se. I think it's very beautiful. And if I had had a chance to travel more when I was young, I think I'd probably speak quite a few languages. But I love the word tools, and they do a great deal to you. And as a child, we didn't have any radio, television, movies. Books were the beautiful thing, and there's an enormous amount of reading out loud. And you as a child, you're also being asked often by the family to read out loud to them. So the oral expression was a very powerful matter, and you found yourself employing the tools of a Dickens, whoever it might be, Shakespeare. And so I cared about the tools, all right. Then came the days of World War I, and I was in the regular United States Navy. I had some tasks of trust, dealing with very special secret information, but particularly in the transport operation, where we had 130 ships in the transport operation and carried 1 million men across the Atlantic and back. And we didn't lose a single soldier to the enemy submarines. The operation was so successful that way. Well, in the communication, I was a special and secret aide to the admiral in command. We had messages to get to captains of ships. I then developed my own personal discipline, which I said, I don't want anybody ever to misunderstand me. I don't mind if I'm not understood. He'll come back and say, I don't understand you. But if he thinks he understands you and you've told him, but it's ambiguous and you didn't realize it was, you might lose all those men. So that I set up this discipline way back there. I said, never mind if I'm not understood, but be sure that I'm not misunderstood. So I've learned then to be really very incisive in such writing, also to be very economical, because I really grew up with a wireless, a telegraph east, and this is the first really very great reality of communication I had in my life, because I was still very young in that Navy, and this has appealed to me very, very much. And from that time, in 1927, I was 32 years of age, I decided to reorganize my life very much anyway, and I realized that how easy it is to teach parrots words and not have them understand at all. How easy it is for human beings to sing cliches that get a laugh, and then everybody uses the same cliche day after day, month after month, until it has no meaning whatsoever. And how easy it is when you just say boo and the child jumps, and then the child wants you to say boo. They say boo, do you want you to jump, but you don't jump anymore. I saw that how quickly we can lose the value of the words. So in 1927, when I was 32, starting to do a program of my own thinking, I decided I must have, as much as possible, a moratorium on words. I made my mind that I must never make a sound, a word, let come out of my mouth. That's what I was pretty sure it was going to do to my fellow human beings. I began to really value them. It's incredible in the value as tools which could really bring about good effects. So combining necessity to be economical and wanting to only use words when I really felt that it warranted in communication, this began to dictate my style. When I write very much as a sculptor. There's something I want to talk about. For instance, you asked me about the word creativity, and so there's creative is the idea. I just take over a little off the stone, but then I keep looking at it, and I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. Because first the ideas are all there, then the ideas in the right arrangement, and then the more economical way of saying it. Can I clean up? Is there any ambiguity in there? It must be always adequate. It must be both comprehensive and incisive. So the discipline is very, very severe. When I began doing my book Synergetics on mathematics, I realized how much science misuses words. As for instance, long, long ago, physics discovered there are no solids. And yet we'll find in very recent times, when we came to discovering the transistor, physics talking about solid-state physics. It's very, very thoughtless and very deceiving of the public to use such words so carelessly. Physics has found no continuums. Physics has found no straight lines, found only waves. I find human beings talking about planes and straight lines and so forth. They just do not exist. So that I find that words, many, many words are invalid. That's, for instance, words up and down. And everybody uses words up and down, and they were invented due to the fact that man is so tiny and his earth is so big that all he knew about it was seen to be sort of a plain with mountains and valleys, but primarily a plain. Then he said all the trees are obviously parallel to one another. All the human beings standing there are parallel to one another. He said if we have just one plane in geometry, then all the perpendiculars to the same plane must be parallel to one another. That would mean then all the vertical experiences we have, we said just go up and down. The minute you know we're on a sphere, none of the perpendiculars are parallel to one another. So you and I and all of us today have our friends with their heads sticking out in all these different directions around our Earth. There is their physics have found absolutely nothing to suggest an up in the universe or down. So the right words are go in and out. You go into the Earth or into the moon. In where you can point to, and out is any direction. You go in to go out on the other side. And those you have in, out, and around. Now, I found very, very important to say such things. When, for instance, when I began saying in and out, and realizing that electronics only came in our century. Electrons discovered when I was 3 years of age in 1898, and it was not publicized, but it came into great play with World War I, with the radio, and suddenly electronics were very, very important. And as we get into electronics, we began to have something called tuning in. We had some of the electromagnetic range, electromagnetic spectrum. Extraordinary. In 1930, the first chart is published, electromagnetic spectrum. And there on that chart, you found all the different chemical elements when incandescent have their own unique frequencies and colors that you and I can't see, but the chemical emulsion can see them as a black line. So we had this great electromagnetic spectrum identifying all the chemical elements and all the X-ray and the long radio waves and the short radio waves. Then there was red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, where you and I have the equipment to tune. We use the words now like magnetics to tune in. So we have where you and I can tune in directly, without direct sight, without an instrument, is less than a millionth of the reality. And all the things are going to affect all of our tomorrows. The information is being developed in realms of electromagnetic spectrum can only be contacted by instruments, not directly by our eyes. So you have to do it through our mind. Now, the very word then, when I began to use the word in and out, I began to use tune in and tune out. We found that the words up and down went with a very static concept of the universe. So we had something called space. We had solids and we had space, contradicting one another. And they just Einsteinian, the pre-speed of light and so forth, where now we know everything's normally in motion, everything is always transforming. Whereas now then I have to say, now that I have the words tune in and tune out, what I used to call space is just at presently not tuned in. It's a very different thing. Then there's that which is tuned in and that which is not tuned in. Begin to think this way and you suddenly find complete difference about just the concept of what is life and death. All on the basis of reusing the right words. Right. So I say, you and I are, while we're sitting in a little studio looking at each other's eyes, with electromagnetic waves communicating that way between our eyes, we are being electromagnetically broadcast. And somebody's tuning us in, and for the moment, you and I are now part of their life. That's an event of life. Life are various events. Once you understand that what we might think about the death, there really is no death. It's something just you haven't tuned in on it. And we know we have this very limited equipment, but now we're learning how we can get the extensions instrumentally to tune in on so much.
How does one tune in? How do you get in contact with the universe?
Here we have frequencies. You must get on the same frequency. Wavelengths. You remember the old coils of the earliest days of radio, and you just moved a slide along here and had so many coils. That's somebody how you only had two coils. That's very frequency, whatever it may be.
What is universe to you?
I, again, being very fussy about words, I said I must never use the word universe again if it doesn't have very definite meaning to me. I said I'd like to give a scientific definition of the universe. And my most satisfying to me definition of science I've ever heard was by Sir James Jeans, who said, "Science is the earnest attempt to set in order the facts of experience." We all have experience, but the hotter the colder, and begin to find something out about them. And find that different frequencies are going with those different heats, whatever it may be. Because I like that, then I said, if I'm going to give a scientific definition of the universe, it must be in the terms of experience. It is, as Einstein said, the raw material of science is experience. I have another great scientist, was Ernst Mach, a Viennese physicist, and he said, physics is arranging our experiences in most economical order, because physics finds nature always acts most economically. So in order to find out about nature, you must examine the most economical ones. But experience is the raw material there. So I said, if I'm going then to define the universe in a scientific manner, I must then define it in the terms of experience. So I said, all right, by universe I mean the aggregate of all of humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated experiences. What else am I talking about? The aggregate of all of humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated experiences. Communication could be yourself or to the other, but the awareness only comes along with the whatever it is that makes us communicate to ourselves. That's what I'm looking at. What is that? So I say, universe then is this aggregate of all of humanity's experiences, which they've been able to communicate either to self or to others. And somebody say, I think you left something out. And I say, what did I leave out? I said, dreaming. I said, all right, now that's part of my experience. You said dreaming's in there. Or it's part of my experience you do dream. And it's part of my experience that the dictionary always gets larger as we have more and more facets of the same phenomena universe. And we get another word for that new experience. So that I see part of experience is growth and becoming. The more there's more awareness, and then getting to more of this definition of universe, I found Einstein on behalf of scientists who, he said, always are dealing in the physical. Scientists are concerned with the physical. The physical is all energy. Energy associated with matter are the same energy associated with radiation, one convertible in the other. But the physics is concerned with the energy. And because of the speed of learning the light had a speed, it was not an instant universe anymore, Einstein, realizing, I'm just going to give my own set of examples. If you look at the pole star, you're seeing a live show taking place 680 years ago. It took 680 years for that light to get to us. Look at the star at the end of the handle of the dipper, 180 years ago. We're looking at for instance, Orion's belt. We're very familiar. There are two bright stars in there. One of those is 1,100 years ago, another 1,500 years ago. So our eyes see away and ago. And Einstein said, universe is an aggregate of non-simultaneous events. And we are talking about the universe as observed, as we experience it, is an aggregate of non-simultaneous events, the reports of which are coming to us at the same time here now, but they're occurring at different times. So he said, it's an aggregate of non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping energy events. So each one of these energy events has a duration. So there's something like the threads going into a rope comes in and it lasts so long overlapping other ropes. And so I felt that Einstein's definition of aggregate of non-simultaneous only partially overlapping energy events of different duration was also the definition of what I'll call a scenario. In a scenario, you then have a man is born and he gets to be father and grandpa, and then he goes checks out. He overlaps a lot of other characters. Episodes are introduced like those threads, and some come and stay in for a long time, some are very short. In scenario universe, we realize that one frame of a caterpillar does not tell you it's going to become a butterfly. One picture of a butterfly by itself doesn't tell you it can fly. You have to have a number of frames before you discover how it flies, that it is flying. It might take you millions and billions of frames before you catch on how it flies. Anyway, to have any real meaning in scenario universe, have quite a lot of sequence. Now this is very, very different than when I said from a single frame affair. And I find most of humanity still today saying, I wonder what's outside. They think of the universe as a sculpture or a static single frame. Well, you find out the picture just gets a little bigger. What's outside that? So asking what's outside is like saying, which word is the dictionary? It's actually a meaningless question now in view of our experience that the universe is scenario. Now, I then give you my combination of a universe which is a scenario universe, and I can think about not just the physical, which Einstein was thinking about, and he said the physical will always move a needle either electromagnetically or gravitationally. I want to think about something that doesn't move in the needle. Just looking in your eyes, I'm talking to you, I can understand that you're understanding me. It doesn't move in the needles at all. The meaning, comprehension, these are all metaphysical, don't move in the needles at all. It doesn't make the question language of speaking, understanding something else altogether. And so there's metaphysical as well as physical. So I was interested in the definition of universe that includes all the experiences, both physical and metaphysical. So I still go along my aggregate of all of humanity's concept and communicated experiences in dealing with scenario universe as an aggregate of non-simultaneous, partially overlapping events, both physical and metaphysical. This is fairly close to a good definition. And then a few years ago, in fact, half a century ago, I became tremendously interested in the word environment, the environment itself. And the environment was not a lot of static things, but a great many events of different frequencies, different magnitudes. As it's a way in ago, some of these energies impinge on you or and I from outside us, may impinge upon us from inside us. So some of them enormous high magnitude, some very delicate light. And thinking about then, I call that the environment as an aggregate of energy events. I said, I must define an environment if I can also. So I got a little rhyme about it. An environment to each must be all that isn't me. Universe in turn must be all that isn't me and me.
Well, universe, in a sense, is process. It's not a static thing. It's not a noun, as it were.
Right.
Does it have an intellect, or is it random?
To me, the most important question you could really ask, when I began to do my own thinking in 1927, at the age of 32, I said, in order to do my own thinking, I must give up all my beliefs. Because by belief, I mean accepting explanations of physical phenomena of which you have no experimental evidence, nor that anybody else has, as far as you know. So I said, if I'm going to then do my own thinking, go on my own experimental evidence, on that experience phenomena of science, then I said, it is part of my experience that at 32, I witnessed that really a majority of human beings have a sense of some great awareness of a great mystery of life, and assume something like we call the word God. And there are many, many religions which make it perfectly clear that billions and billions of human beings so moved. I said, all right, as much as that's your experience that they are, I think you must now ask yourself personally, do you have, in your experience, any reason to have to assume a greater intellect operative in the universe than that of humans? I said, I'm overwhelmed by it. I spoke to you a little earlier today then about human minds having the capability to discover principles of relationships existing between that are not of any of the special cases considered separately. That is, that there's nothing in the moon per se that says it's going to pull on the Earth, or it's going to pull the tides of the Earth, vice versa. Right. I find then human mind alone, in contradistinction to the brain, is able to find these relationships existing between, which turn out to be what they call these generalized principles, which are eternal. Now, to me, this is very extraordinary, because when you and I use the word design in contradistinction to randomness, which you just used, we mean that the parts are intellectually, when you use the word design, we always equate the word design with some kind of an intellect, a capability to arrange deliberately. So that I find that when I look at the sum total of all the known generalized principles, whether it's the gravity or the principle of the leverage or optical refraction, whatever it may be, if I look at them all together, inasmuch as they're all eternal, they're eternally, which means concurrently operative, and most impressive is none of them has ever been found to contradict any of the others. This means then, I said, a design means the parts are in view of the others. They are arranged deliberately. We find only human intellect able to discover, and he discovered the pull apart the curtain we didn't know we were going to make a discovery, but suddenly we're faced with those extraordinary generalized principles, which right clearly are eternal. You cannot qualify to be, unless they are eternal. We have human mind then having access to an eternal design of the universe. Just look, we never know when the last one we found is going to be the last one or not, but we got this much of a glimpse so far of a great design, which can only be intellectually expressed actually as it gave a rate of change, a co-varying rate of change of the interactiveness being of the second power as against the first power arithmetical rate of distance. This can only be expressed mathematically, intellectually, and quite clearly we're discovering an a priori intellectual arrangement. So I said, my experience then all whelms me with a manifest of a greater intellect operative in the universe than that of human beings.
Do you think that intellect, that intellectual integrity universe, has a design for humanity?
The universe is the brilliance of the design. Whether it's, how do you make a planet of this size, zoom around the sun at 92 million miles away and do it absolutely regularly, rotating as all the things it's doing? How do you arrange to have this biosphere around our particular planet? We've now been to Mars and Venus. They don't have any such. And we have extraordinary conditions here by which you and I being designed 60% water, and the water is not just a drink, because liquids, as you have experienced, are non-compressible, but when you push on a liquid like it pushes the yield, so it distributes its loads. You and I design 6% of water, and so is a tree. I get dehydrated, and the tree just flops down. Because the liquids are non-compressible, they distribute the load, so you and I can run into tables and bump ourselves for many, many years. I'm 81 today, and we distribute those loads. If you didn't distribute it, then it would damage you very, very greatly. When designing a ship of the sea, you're very eager to get it launched into the liquid medium because there's air inside it, and and water on the outside of it, and both of them distribute their load so that all the stresses get distributed. What you avoid in your ship is trying to have a concentrated load running to another ship or running to a rock. So I find then the whole success of human design and biological design is that all this liquid in it. And liquid freeze between boiling and freezing in very small range, and everything's designed this biosphere to keep things at that range so we don't freeze or boil. And we have 3/4 of Earth covered with a very little thin film of water, which we call the ocean. Looks deep to you and I, but is incredibly shallow. Averages only a mile deep. The diameter of our Earth is 8,000 miles. So if you have a 6-foot steel ball and breathe on it, the depth of the condensation of your breath is deeper than our ocean. And there's that tiny little film that has to take care of, this design of this whole phenomena. How do we get energy to keep you and I going? We need a lot of it, all done by beautiful photosynthesis of all the vegetation, the algae, impounding that sun radiation by photosynthesis, converting in beautiful hydrocarbon molecules for you and I to consume. So the integrity of design of the universe, not one single part is innocent of the others. All incredible complementarity, interchangeability, and so superbly designed that no energy ever gets lost. None has to be created because it never gets lost. So that we have you say the relationship of that intellect must very much need to have a local monitor capable in this particular little planet, in this particular galaxy. We have 100 billion stars in our galaxy. We now know there are billions such galaxies. The universe must need some information gathering capability locally in view of all the intertransformabilities, all the varieties of acts and seeming freedoms, to have some local monitoring to get all local information, which we've been able to do, getting the information, light coming from all those billion galaxies and running through the spectroscope. We now know the relative abundance of chemical elements present within 11.5 billion light years around us. And we have that mind capability, which is so magnificent. We are also, what is common to all lives and all history is problems. We're here for getting information gathering and problem solving with the information we get. I'm sure this great intellect of the universe needs, in relation to the integrity of the eternal regeneration, needs to have such local information gathering capabilities all through this universe. So I'm sure we're part of a very great design. And whether we'll fulfill it or not, I don't know, because we see nature then needing various functions. For instance, she needs to be able to regenerate those trees. And the trees have to have their trees planted where they get out, where they can get the sun, because their function is to impound the sun. So each tree is launching hundreds of thousands of little airplane seeds blowing out from under, hopefully to land where they're going to prosper. But the number that are going to prosper are very few. So when nature has important functions to be filled, she makes many starts adequate so enough of them are going to go. So I would think our kind of function, if it's very important in the universe, I think it is, she would make many starts, and this particular planning might not make good. And I think humanity is in just such a great trial right this minute.
So in general, universe to you wants human beings to be a success. We have a function in universe, but we may not make it.
That's right.
And this is a critical time. Do you think we've gone past the point of no return in regards to the environment?
That's a very delicate question. I've been doing this kind of thinking for half a century, and I think it's still absolutely touch and go. I'm quite confident we now have the option to make it, that we actually have the know-how, the resources. We've gotten to the point in the millions of years of mistake-making, being all born naked, helpless, ignorant, making our own mistakes. We've gotten to the point where we now have enough information to really make it. Where all of humanity can be a physical success, have that completely out of the way, which means a new relationship to the universe, where we're not just having to struggle in order to learn enough more principles. We now learn enough of the principles to really carry on in a new, completely sort of grown-up way with the universe, and stop forever the idea of making human beings struggle to see which is fittest to survive.
Mm-hmm. What's in the way then? Why do we have problems?
Nature also has her gestation rates for everything. She has enormous checks and balances, of course. So the human baby takes so many months, and other elephant babies take something else. And industrial use of inventions, which are they have their gestation rates in different arts. So I see nature, the biggest ones take the longest, and this is a very big change we're talking about. So while we're on the threshold of change over to something else, I can see that there's residual in humanity. Be sure that humanity would do things. Nature gave them hunger and so forth. She gave them fear, and so that they would often do the right things for the wrong reason. As for instance, they needed really to develop the technology so they could look out for each other, but they didn't dare to undertake it in peacetime. They said, that's too expensive. But then they said, well, the enemy is going to use that, they're going to destroy us, so all right, then we must acquire it. So the fallout and byproduct of the developing technology for protection and for war suddenly then came into the peaceful and suddenly making human beings much more successful. The fallout from war technology has, in my lifetime, brought about a condition where we've gone from less than 1% of humanity to 60% of humanity now enjoying a higher standard of living than was known and experienced by any human being, any monarch or great potentate at 1900. Enormous. So I say, yes, nature wants the thing to be done. She's trying to make man a success. And there's still an enormous residual fear. And I found human beings really quite courageous as individuals. But often they're the head of the family, and in your love for your family, in your fear that they might get in trouble, I say, I'm not going to quarrel with the system. I know what my boss wants. I want to get the living for my family. So I find there's enormous inertia of the fear and ignorance, and not humanity not understanding its technology, not realizing that the option is not to be exercised politically, but accomplished by a design revolution where we use the right technologies for the right purposes, and their high efficiencies are all there to be used, but we're not using them.
Richard Buckminster Fuller, for whom the reality principle is a deadly weapon wielded by the cohorts of boredom, who agrees with Bacon that he who has wife and child has given hostages to fortune. Do you agree with Bacon? Do you agree with Fuller? Do you agree with us? Do you relish an entire program featuring the ideas and exploits of one man, however exceptional and significant? Well, our address is NPR, Washington, D.C. 20036. Take advantage. For do we not come to you courtesy of everyone with funds provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? Do you know that your producer is Robert Molesky and your associate producer is Jay Kernis? Further, production assistance is offered by Gigi Yellen. Your engineer is and has been Jim Anderson, and I will always be Oscar Brand, another voice in the wind.
This is NPR, National Public Radio.